Welcome, everyone, through all time and space to an all new episode of Weebs on the Weekends, a podcast where we break down the anime news highlights of the week and give a retrospective look at anime that premiered 10 years ago. Today's episode will be covering the news from the fourth week of October 2020 and give our thoughts on whether the first three episodes of the 2010 anime Panty Stockings with Garterbelt makes us sus or expect the rest of the series. My name is Jay Johnson. I'm a part-time weeb and full-time English language sensei. And with me, as always, is my co-host Sam Martinez, part-time weeb and full-time automail mechanic. How you doing today, Sam?
Sani Bona Utisha Johnson, ni Johnny Nina.
Oh, wow. Again, pronunciation is always on point. And again, I'm feeling like I haven't ever heard this language again. And I think that's a credit to you picking, near extinct or less popular languages that I wouldn't have encountered on my travels around the world. So,
You want
oh
me to give you a
yeah,
hint?
a hint would be great, Sam. Yes.
Okay, I would say that this language is in the area that you have been wanting us to visit earlier in this season.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so I'm assuming you mean something in Asia. Oh, no, you mean, part of the season. Oh, interesting. Oh, you mean something Northern African. Okay. Okay, I know a lot of Nigerians that speak Igbo, but I don't think that's anything similar to it. So I'm going to say something from the Sudan, some kind of Sudanese language.
Ooh, close, but it's a little bit further south. This is the Zulu language, and it's native to South Africa. And this is from the 2011 census. It had about 12 million speakers around that time, and it is the language of the Zulu people. Again, about 12 million speakers who primarily inhabit the KwaZulu Natal of South Africa, and it's widely spoken within South Africa. It's about 24% of the population, and it's understood over 50% of the population, and it's one of Africa's 11 official languages since 1994.
Okay, interesting. And I think Sam, I've been to South Africa, so it's really interesting.
Oh,
I
I
didn't
didn't know
even.
that.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, the only languages that I'm familiar in South Africa is because, they're, the ones that I did when I was studying at Cape Town or University of Cape Town is Afrikaans and Xhosa. And
Ah,
you pronounce Kosa with the click because I think it's the X's, the C's, the S's, and the G's are the clicks for the Kosa language. But yeah, I
okay.
never heard Zulu, so that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. But how am I doing, Sam? Doing pretty well. This week was the preliminaries for my school's English week, which will be in about 2 weeks. So I had to hold a spelling bee competition, a Jeopardy quiz show, as well as review a lot of preliminary essays and poetry and a lot of stage production. I'm not the head
Wow,
of my English department, but
that-
I did have to
mhm.
do a lot of work this week regarding a lot of English prep. But as soon as the event turns up, all I'm doing is judging. So I don't mind laying the groundwork for that. But that was my
Oh,
work week.
so all you did was mainly just set the foundation, get ready for it. I thought you had. I thought that from what you had said, it seemed as though that it had already happened. So when you judge, will you be judging both the spelling bee and Jeopardy? So you'll be Alex Trebek in Mongolia.
I'll be basically the Alex Trebek of it, and the
Okay.
MC for the spelling bee. So I'll be the the official pronouncer of the competition. But yeah, those are the two events I'm in charge of. But I had
Ooh.
to do a lot of other groundwork of talking to the staff about where we're holding the events, as well as the student council members that are kind of helping me as my assistants. So that's fun. But other than that, I think the most fun I had this week was again, I was killing my students in Among Us. And it's really interesting to see how my students or that kind of adolescent mindset kind of processes critical information. detective skills and like looking at patterns of recognition and to see how they kind of play the game because I've been playing like with, friends of our age group and that you kind
Yeah.
of get an understanding like they've been watching Among Us videos and gameplays, but like kids here are like just going around trying not to get caught killing and they're not really planning out their murder. So it's really fun to see that kind of spontaneity when it comes to, having. Sorry, I'm just thinking about it because it's so weird. Like, if you're studying how to play the game, you're like, oh, these are the areas where you're killing, and like these are the strategies to how you effectively sabotage things so you can lure people into traps. But my kids
Yeah.
are just kind of looking both ways, like they're crossing the road to see if they see anybody before they kill, and then they just leave. It's just really entertaining to watch. But yeah, so had a lot of work done, but then I had a lot of downtime with my students to kind of um, get into that mindset of how to actually play Among Us. But yeah, that's how I'm doing, Sam. How about you?
No, I'm doing fairly well. It was funny that you had mentioned about the Among Us because you had sent me a video earlier in the week, and I didn't realize because you just made me realize that when you play Among Us, you don't necessarily play for that game that you're playing, but you're also trying to play the long game. The video you sent me was the one guy who always says, "Oh, vote me out, vote me out, vote me out," all the times that he was innocent, and the one time that he was the killer, he would, go back to saying, vote me out, just sort of, he was playing the long game in case he was the imposter. And so it was just funny when you were talking about the different levels of thinking. That aspect came to my mind as well. As far as what I'm doing this week, I'm doing all right. We are celebrating Halloween here in the States, and it was a bit funny because with my company, what they do is they do an annual Halloween costume contest. And with things going on because of the pandemic, everyone's been a little bit on edge. And obviously, this year, not as many people participated. But and even in my office, we weren't even sure if they were going to still hold the competition. So we didn't come up with anything that we can do as a unit because they have different categories. It's best individual, best office theme, and scariest costumes, things of that nature. And so, if anything, I just wanted to at least, as what you had said earlier, get my participation trophy. And I had a red shirt from Star Trek, and so I had that on. And I ended up getting an honorable mention for the best costume, and I got a gift card because of it. But I will say that it wasn't without its dangers because if you well know a lot of Star Trek lore, the people with red shirts from the very first series, they are notorious for being killed. That's because they were security and sort of the bodyguard of the Enterprise. So they're always the first ones out in the fray, and as a result, they're always the first ones killed, usually in the most horrific manner. And I almost had, well, I had a brush with something exciting earlier that day. As I was walking out to my car, a snake had reared his head and tried to bite me. And so ever since then, I was on my uh, P's and Q's trying to make sure that I wasn't a statistic in a red shirt.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, don't be a red shirt. Yeah, that's the thing that's kind of become like just common parlance in like the geek nerd community is like, yeah, totally, you're totally a red shirt, bruh. Yeah, especially how some things like in horror is like, oh yeah, the black people die first. They're basically always red shirts. And yeah, but yeah, Halloween's the time of the year, so do have some spooky news. So Sam, you want to get into the
Ooh.
news for this week?
I don't know if I'm ready for the spooky news, but let's go ahead. Let's rip this band aid off.
All right, cool. So, time codes will always be in the description, but let's talk about the news that happened this week. So, the big news story, well, actually, there's a couple of pieces that I have for today. But the first one I want to open up with is a follow up to last week's story about the Demon Slayer movie, Mugen Train. And the
Hmm.
title, or I guess the news for the week, is that the Japanese female singer Lisa ranks number one for 2 weeks straight on the Orchcon single weekly chart. So Orchcon is basically the Billboard 100s of Japanese like music and the media industry over there. So her song, this is called Ho Oh wait, Homura, and that's the theme song for the Mugen Train movie. And I know you haven't been able
Oh,
to
okay.
see it yet, Sam, because of all the availabilities, which we talked last week
Hmm.
of that will be coming to the states or the USA early next year. But for right now, yeah, her theme song that she wrote for the movies trending number one. And interesting enough that this is the first time this record has been broken since 2011.
Who was the record in 2011? Do we know?
Yeah, so yeah, of course, I always do my research. But yeah, it's a song called Toilet no Kami-sama, and it's not attached to any anime. Again, like the Orchcon is like music overall in Japan, so like there's like
Yeah.
of course non-anime music related, but this is just a music single that was released in 2011. So her song recently basically sold 38,000 copies, both physical and digital. And this is a part of her new album, which is called Leo 9. And that sold basically 66,000 copies in its first week. So the original release was back in October 14th. So have you heard any of her music other than her theme music or theme song of the Demon Slayer?
She may be one of those people where I have heard her stuff, but I didn't know who she was. If I had heard of her, it would have been in another anime franchise, and I can't remember. Did you say that she did other music for anime, or this was her first one?
Yeah, she's done a couple of, but nothing of like real notes. So
Nothing
like
of renown.
her first song for Demon Slayer was called Gorengi, and that topped the Orchcon Billboard basically list for 44 weeks straight. So if you go on YouTube, it's kind of like one of those iconic songs now, given that it plays heavily throughout the series, and it's Demon Slayer was such a big hit last year about
Yeah.
the story of like Tanjiro becoming a demon slayer to protect his younger sister, who recently became a demon after their family was slaughtered. So like it's a big song and it's kind of like become an anthem of the anime community to say, oh yeah, we're mainstream, but anime is not mainstream yet. Sad to say. But yeah, that's the first news story for today, Sam. Any thoughts? Do you want to check out her new single?
I definitely will. You mentioned, wait, the single, it was Homura. That was for Demon Train, or oh yeah, I would definitely. I don't know if I want to listen to it because if I listen to it, I'm going to want to look at the lyrics, and I would have to go back to listen to the other music for Demon Slayer because I don't know how intertwined with the story the lyrics were to the music. So depending on that, because I don't want to necessarily spoil myself if it turns out to be closely intertwined to the story of the anime. I know it doesn't happen often, but I haven't spoiled myself so far, and I kind of want to keep it that way until I see the movie.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's not really popular, like you said, anymore, but there was a time where soundtracks were very much tied to their movie presentation. Like, even back when Phantom of the Menace, uh, Phantom Menace came out before, where the soundtrack for Phantom Menace came out before the movie premiere, and one of the title tracks is Qui-Gon Jinn's death. That was a big spoiler right before, like the day before Phantom Menace came out in theaters. But yeah, I'm not surprised that that's your kind of mind frame about it because it is something that does happen occasionally, and the internet is definitely full of spoilers, especially now that Mugen Train has been out for a good 2 weeks now. So even in their promotional art, there's like open spoilers if you didn't want to go into it at all. But, anyways, that's the first news story. Second news story. The other big news, other than the Mugen Train news, is that this week Netflix had their anime festival premiere for a digital audience. So there was a couple of big news stories that dropped. So I just wanted to talk about a few that I found, interesting enough because like
Okay.
right now Crunchyroll is in negotiations to buy out. Well, sorry, Sony is in negotiations to buy out Crunchyroll, so that kind of emerged during this time this week, as well as some
Ooh.
other anime for next year's
Hmm.
premiere. But the one that really caught my attention was that the second news story is that the Netflix Anime Festival announces which studio's original anime will stream early next year. And this anime is called Vampire in the Garden, and Studio Wit has been on a roll in like the past year or so. They did Vinland Saga last year. They did Great Pretender this year, as well as they're handling the final season of Attack on Titan. But Vampire in the
Oh.
Garden is basically about a human girl and the vampire queen on a journey to find a lost country known as Paradise, where humans and vampires have lived peacefully for centuries. So the main staff of this, again, part of the news that Netflix dropped this week is that like the assistant director on this project has done Claymore and Hellsing
Hmm.
Ultimate, as well as the art director has been in charge of Attack on Titan and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So we're seeing this recently that Netflix is making more of a move into the anime
Hmm.
industry this year. So are you looking forward to Netflix animes?
Oh, I'm definitely am. I was watching Blood of Zeus the other day. It was made by the same people that did the Castlevania series, and even though Castlevania had its faults, it was still fun and enjoyable. And I was trying to see where they went with the Blood of Zeus. So I'm looking forward to it. I don't know if I'm interested in Vampire Garden, but if it's the same people that did Claymore and Vinland Saga, then it sounds like the action scenes will be really on point. I'm actually kind of surprised that the same studio that with that's working with Netflix is that did Vinland Saga. Mainly because when I had to watch Vinland Saga, I had to watch it on Amazon. So because Netflix is now partnered with them, I guess that means we can see Vinland on Netflix in the future.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, a lot of these companies are like not cross promotionals, but like their libraries are very much branched over because you can see like many like HBO Max has things that are on Amazon Prime or
Hmm.
things that are on High Dive can be also be viewed on Verve. So no matter where it's being distributed, there's always some kind of overlapping library that these streaming services have. So that shouldn't be too much of a surprise. The only thing that really surprised me about this announcement was, again, this is a follow up really to last week where we talked about Netflix is trying to get in business with a lot of these different studios, be it
Hmm.
Mappa or Mira. Again, people responsible for Legend of Korra, which I'll be bringing up in the future a little bit more. But yeah, it's interesting that Netflix is making this move now at the end of the year. So I think they're trying to set claim to a lot of these studios that are getting more traction, I guess, this year.
Yeah, that's what it seems
All
like. At
right.
least trying to take advantage of the pandemic landscape while they can before everybody can start working again and everything's more expensive.
Yeah, for sure. So the other piece of news that I wanted to talk about from the Netflix Anime Festival is that they revealed the character's design for Lee Sean Thomas's next anime called Yasuki. And interesting enough, this is very much going under the radar, but Yasuki is the historic, or actually the historic character that was the first African samurai. Have you ever heard of Yasuki, Sam?
Oh, I've heard about this. There was rumors that Chadwick Boseman was supposed to do, I don't know if it was a live action adaptation for this or the anime version of this. And as I said, this was rumors back when he was still with us, but it seems like what's his name? The guy from Atlanta and from Sorry to Bother You. It seems like he's going to be voicing that character, correct or no?
Oh yeah, you're completely right. Yeah. So yeah, his name is Lakeith Stansfield.
He's such a good actor.
For sure. And he basically, yeah, he was the main protagonist in Sorry to Bother You. He also has a
Mhm.
supporting role in Atlanta, which is the Donald Glover or Childish Gambino show about Atlanta. And as well as he has a supporting role in Knives Out, which was the recent detective series, kind of like in a feel of Sherlock Holmes or like Murder on the Orient Express. But yeah, so this is being directed by Lee Sean Thomas, who did Cannon Busters. Did you get a chance to check out Cannon Busters on Netflix?
Oh, he did Cannon Busters? Oh, that's going to be interesting. So I did watch Cannon Busters. It had promise. It was a little flat, but I think that was that guy's first anime that he directed, right? Or that he directed slash wrote. So now that he got his feet wet and he's doing what did you say the name was? Yasui?
Yeah, Yasuki.
Yasuki. Okay. I wonder if he's going to try to get some influence from Afro Samurai and try to inject the hip hop elements because Cannon Busters had some hip hop elements in regards to music. And I don't know if it's too early, if he needs one more show before this, or I think this would be a telling anime in this guy's creative work and how he wants to go. Because as I said, with Cannon Busters, it's a good starting anime for him to do. You know, where he can get his feet wet. And he's learning the process. Hopefully, he's making the correct steps, and it will be interesting to see him grow in this next work.
Yeah, for sure. So let's test out your pattern recognition, Sam. What do you think studio that Mr. Lee Sean Thomas has taken this project to? Like, which studio do you think is producing this?
I want to say it's either the studio that did Afro Samurai or Samurai Champloo, if he can do that. I'm not sure. I don't know what studio that he went to for Cannon Busters. I thought that
Hmm.
it felt a little bit more independent. But if I was him, I would try to go to the people that did Samurai Champloo or Afro Samurai.
Okay, that's fair. Well, I was asking your pattern recognition because
Yeah.
I've been talking about the studio for the past couple episodes, but he's actually
Oh,
taken this to
oh. So it
Mappa.
would. I was that was gonna be my one. I was going to say Mappa. Okay, that's
All
going to be
right, cool. Yeah.
interesting. That's going to be
For
interesting.
sure. Yeah, because Mappa has kind of
Oh.
placed their mark in their fight choreography and fight direction. So not surprised, but yeah, Yasuki is basically the historic samurai or the historic figure that was the first samurai, African samurai that served under Oda Nobunaga, very famous
Mhm.
Japanese warlord or fighter during the Japan's warring state periods. Again, not talking much about Japanese history right now, but for anime wise, the whole premise of this anime has this very not fictionalized, but it has this fantasy element where there's going to be the warring period in Japan, but it's going to be in one of your favorite genres, Sam. It's going to be mechs and magic. So,
They're going to
um,
bring mechs into this show? Oh, of
yep,
course, of
apparently.
course. He did Cannon Busters. How could there not be mechs? Of course.
Of course, yes. So it's going to be along the lines of a lone cub and what's the other
Oh,
figure in that? But
Wolf and
lone
Cub?
cub, wolf. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, wolf and cub, where he's going to be in charge of ferrying a child through like war torn Japan, and the child, of course, is going to be targeted by warlords and daimyos trying to kill it for some reason. And
Hmm.
Netflix says like it's a mysterious child. So again, putting in the genre of magic and mechs is probably the kid's probably going to be magical in some kind of way. And no, not Nobunaga, but Yasuki has to protect the child. But yeah,
Hmm.
that's an interesting story we're going to be keeping our eye on because the premiere is next year, early next year.
Oh, that's going to be cool. Oh,
Yep,
I'm excited now.
Spring 2021 is looking up. but even though the sequel is usually worse than the original, so let's see how 2021 shapes out. But that leaves us to our next last news story, and it's a spooky one. Sam, you ready?
Oh, go ahead and hit me with it. Hit me with it.
All right, cool. So the manga Jujutsu Kaisen reaches
Mm-hmm.
the 10 million benchmark in circulation. Ooh,
Eee,
scary.
how is that scary?
Well, because for one, there's not really horror that goes on in this anime. I mean, we just talked about it recently about anime that we want to watch. It was my number
Mm-hmm.
two, and I think it was your number one for the season right now, Sam, right?
Yeah, it is. It is.
All right, cool. Yeah, so the manga is basically has reached its 1 million benchmark in copies in circulation. And again, the series is about a high school student that's dragged into a war basically between sorcerers and evil spirits. And the manga first released back in 2018. So after a year ago in November, it had basically 2.5 million copies in circulation when the anime was announced earlier this year. By May, it had 4.5 million copies out in circulation. And then this month, they reported that it reached its uh, 10 million marker. So
Oh
if you
wow.
can do math, Sam, I know you're an engineer, so I know you can do math, but that is a increase of over one in 1 year. It reached over 400% from its original publication. So the author Gigi Yak. Wait, sorry, I'm forgetting his name, but Gigi Akutami, yes, is the author, and he was basically working with Studio Mappa and Crunchyroll to get his property seen, and it's really interesting that it does have horrific elements. It's not really horror because
Mm-hmm.
it's dark fantasy, but I wanted to bring this up to you, Sam, because you're a big manga purchaser when it comes to My Hero Academia. But are you interested enough to purchase the manga for this series?
Now that you mention it, I don't know why it didn't hit me before that I could support it officially over here in the States via the manga. I'll probably start doing that now. And I'm thinking the reason why it jumped so high is because of the anime. The first three episodes were spectacular. Everybody that I've spoken with have enjoyed it, and it seems as though it's really gaining a lot of steam and a lot of traction. And it goes into the horrific events because they essentially have to battle curses, and it goes a little bit into how the curses are born, and it seems as though like they're gonna. It's sort of like the curses become sentient and have an existential crisis. So it's interesting that way, but it's also a battle anime too. So the curses' identity sort of take a back seat to that as well. And I guess like that's why the horror aspect seems a little lacking.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, yeah, it's in the genre of like action adventure. There is a focus on like choreography. So again, it's not technically a horror, but again, like I said, there's horrific elements. Like there's a lot of
Hmm.
decapitations and like there is a creature that actually there's a pretty horrific in the most recent episode, I guess. There's basically someone gets deboned and there's like their body is like on display, kind of, and then even
Yes,
one of the spirits has somewhat of a jump scare moment in
I,
that
for,
most recent episode.
I forgot about that. That was one thing that was interesting. So whenever we do talk about JJK, that way we don't have to worry about the pronunciation. Is that we have to put a disclaimer on it because in the manga is pretty horrific, and you can essentially everything that you see in the anime you see in the manga. But when I was watching the anime, I wasn't expecting it to be so true to where you do see the horrific elements in detail, because in most anime, whenever somebody gets decapitated or, as you said, deboned or dissolved, it sort of blurs out what's going on, or it shifts the camera away and you can hear it happening in the background. But in JJK, it shows you in its entirety. and I was not prepared for that. I was like, oh, they're actually showing me this. Okay, this is the route that we're going now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we haven't really had a good horror anime in recent times. I mean, JoJo
Mhm.
Ito's Uzumaki is coming out next year, early next year, I believe. But this would have been like the perfect time. Again, Halloween is kind of the time where horror kind of thrives because everyone wants to be in a horror mood right before Christmas, since
Yeah.
November into December is kind of Christmas time, but this is kind of like the last time to be scared and to celebrate the season. So it's really interesting, and that's why I've wanted to highlight this story, because the manga is definitely, it leans way more into the horror. As you said, they basically focus a little bit more on how horrific these evil spirits or curses are, where the manga or the anime kind of
Hmm.
leans away from that, but also does do it some justice.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but that's it. Yeah, that's all it for the news, Sam. So you want to transition into your pick of the week for the anime we're reviewing?
Segway transition. Trying to keep in. It's not really horror, but I guess like it's still riding on the coattails of the supernatural and it can lead into horror. But today's episode is based on the anime Panty Stocking with Garterbelt. Hey! So,
Oh,
uh,
thank you, Oprah.
so before I give a little bit of background about the show Penny and Stockings with Garterbelt, have you heard or seen this anime before we decided to watch the 3 episodes up until this point, Jay?
Not at all. I mean, of course, I've heard all the. It's like it's not in the same vein as. Actually, it's pretty close to the same vein as High School of the Dead for my memory of the series, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like 2010 again is a very weird year in how anime was moving from a niche kind of following into the mainstream, even at the time when streaming services were basically being created to stream anime online. Is that Penny and Stocking was kind of the uh, barrier to a lot of people, because it has a, well, we'll talk about its art style, but yeah, the all I've heard about it beforehand was like, you can't watch this until you grow up, young Jay. This is not for you.
No. So now that you're older, Jay, you can say, "I wonder I can watch this popular show now and understand why everybody liked it so much." But I was similar to you when it first came out. I didn't really watch into it. I was more absorbed with other works such as High School of the Dead, and I just never took the time to sit down and watch it. But I really chose this time. I really chose to see this anime because looking back on it, it seemed to be up my alley, so to speak, because it had the irreverent humor. It was bombastic and very energetic in nature, and it seemed to be more of a traditional Sam's choice of anime, and with the supernatural elements in this show, it sort of fits in well with the October spooky theme ever so slightly. And one thing that I found that it was a fun fact, I'm sure you probably already know this, Jay, but it was produced by Gainax Studios. So I was looking at it, it's like, oh, so no wonder why I wanted to watch it, because I'm a secret Gainax fanboy and I just didn't know it yet. But a bit of a summary of the show, Penny Starkins and Garterbelt. Essentially, what happened is the Anarchy sisters, Panty and Stockings, they're two angels that have been kicked out of heaven because of their mild, not their mild, but because of their rude behavior. And they have to live with this priest or reverend named Garterbelt, who is the black guy in the show, by the way. And these angels must buy their way back into heaven by eliminating ghosts or demons or spirits in the city known as Dayton City. However, in order to do this, they have to fight the demons by changing their physical garments, panties with her pantings, and stockings were their, guess what, stockings, and turning them into weapons such as a gun and some swords so that they can essentially turn the spirits into coins. And while they have the skills to pay the bills, so to speak, they aren't really in a hurry. They have the worst worth ethic ever. Panty is a nymphomaniac on egregious proportions, and Stockings is a food junkie for sweets. So they have to be coaxed and reminded that they are not on Earth to indulge in their pleasures, but to go back to heaven and to buy their way back into heaven. And there's also other cast members such as Chuck, which is essentially discount Gurr from Invader Zim, and another boy named Brief, who is essentially the high school geek that helps them hunt ghosts because ghost hunting is a hobby of his. And just as we go forward, Jay, when you saw this show, or at least the first three episodes, what influences did you see stand out to you that was taken into account in making this anime?
Yeah, so if you're looking at it again, like from a like just visual influence standpoint, I think was what you're asking, is that
Hmm.
it has a very weird aesthetic, and you kind of see the Studio Gainax kind of explicitly in how the action is displayed and like the physical comedy. So I wasn't surprised at all when it like produced by Studio Gainax came up. I was like, wow, this really looks like something by Studio Trigger. But yeah, the director director on the project is what's his name? It's Haruyuki Ishimaishi, and he's the
Hmm.
co-founder of Studio Trigger, but he was a director for Studio Gainax. So I was like, oh, that's why it looks so familiar. Because again, Studio Gainax is one of those Studio Ghibli or Studio
Hmm.
A1 Pictures that their aesthetic is their studio. So like
Yeah.
you can notice their kind of production just by its visual cues. But the thing that really caught me off guard about this is why, and like again, why it gave such a bad name for anime back in 2010 is that it looks like something that could be compared to Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Laboratory, Invader Zim, Samurai Jack.
Hmm.
It kind of has that cartoony art style that people are like, oh, it's actually a cartoon. No, it's actually an anime kind of opinion. And I really enjoyed that element of it's being a raunchy comedy, but still has this aesthetic. So I wouldn't be surprised if this premiered on like Adult Swim back in the day.
No, exactly. And I would say that was the main point, because when making this anime, and it's an anime original, by the way, they made a manga adaptation to it a few years later, but it took great homage from American works, and that's why, for instance, when I said Chuck is essentially a Gur knockoff, that was the goal, was because the person who made the show was like, hey, I watch Invader Zim and I enjoy it. I'm putting this character in there because I know that you know what character that I'm talking about. And it, as you said earlier, it's really big influence, like Powerpuff Girls. Even with the original Teen Titans, it has that similar aesthetic, that pseudo American Japanese feel to it, and it also felt like Hi Hi Puffy Amiyumi to me as well. Quick fun facts with Hi Hi Puffy Amiyumi, that they're an actual band, and when they were touring in the states, they had to change their names to sorry, they were originally called Puffy, but then when they went to the States, they had to change their names to Puffy Amiyumi because Sean Combs, aka P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, Puffy, Puff, was going by Puffy at the time. And they didn't want to get in trouble with legalistic things with Puff. So, quick or a quick tangent, but back again, this and it was originally because of this mishmash, and as you said, the comedy that was in it. At first, people were put off by it, and it sort of became a mix of a cult classic, and with some of the other people at the time. David Brothers Comics Alliance, they claimed that this anime was the unholy union of Ren and Stimpy and the Dirty Pair. Now, Jay, have you ever heard of the anime or the manga Dirty Pair?
No, I haven't. So is it just as raunchy as this series is?
No. So essentially, it takes the raunchiness from Ren and Stimpy, but it takes the antics from Dirty Pair. So essentially, the Dirty Pair is these two sisters who were future cops, and they always get their man or they get their bounty. But their thing was every time they went and go and get their bounty, the city that the person lived in would always be destroyed or toppled over because that's just how uh, eccentric that this pair was, and that was what gave them their nickname, the Dirty Pair, because a little bit like with the Fairy Tale Guild in the anime Fairy Tale, whenever they go to a town, they get the job done, but they do more destruction and harm than necessary, and it's not always intentional in order to get the job done. So it seems like the Dirty Pair sort of started that trope, and that was why they had made that parallel between the two, and they also got acclaim for their animation and its soundtrack. And the way that I saw the show, the first two episodes were free to watch and view on Funimation. And Jay, when you watched the anime, did you watch it subbed or dubbed?
Yeah, you said it's available on Funimation now, which is the Funimation service, but it's also available on Crunchyroll as well as Amazon Prime, and that kind of is
Mm-hmm.
why the 2010 animes are so kind of accessible nowadays. Is that again when all the streaming licensing was coming up in the early 2010s, a lot of these series are available, even though like newer series aren't available as rarely nowadays. I mean, again, that's kind of subjective to the service and depending on which country you live in and where the distribution rights are. But I did watch I watched the first three episodes in the dub because of what I've seen of the first three episodes is that this is definitely something that requires to be watched in the dub because of the vocal
Mm-hmm.
performance is just so amazingly candid and it sounds like again like when you talk about voice acting it's so much of a skill. I mean in the west we're kind of numb to the idea of what good voice acting is, but in Japan they go to school for it. They have to do like there's like a long storied history of voice actors like building up their careers where people in the west usually like oh they have a nice voice so they can just voice act, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not really the thing in most animes. So when the anime comes about and it's a long process is that this is like one of those animes that just loses something when you're reading the subtext if it's subbed. Again, like
Yeah.
we talked about Talk to Me Galaxy, is that they kind of go into like a monologuistic speech patterns. So even Japanese people have a hard time following along with it. Same thing with the Monogatari series where like the voice performance is kind of part of the storytelling. Same thing with
Yeah.
Panty Stockings here that the dub is just so great. I don't want to watch it in the sub because it feels like it would ruin the experience.
So it's funny that you said that because I had watched the first three episodes in the dubbed, and then I went back and I want to say and I saw the first episode, sort of did a side by side comparison, and I guess it was sort of again with like the art style because it feels so American or it feels so Western, and also the idioms and the nuances of the language that's used in the English dub, it feels much more natural. When I was watching, oh my goodness, when I was watching the Japanese dub in the first episode, there was a scene where Garterbelt had made the girls some rice curry, and there was he essentially was making a joke saying how because he's black he knows how to cook curry rice, but when it was said in the Japanese, it was just flat. It You can tell they don't know how to write black dialogue in Japanese culture, but in the American dub, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know if it was American, but in the Funimation dub, there, the nuances where they use the idiom, once you go black, you don't go back. That was used in the compliments of his cooking, just like the expertise in the art of the language, as well as the culture of the demographic that you're reaching. It was there. And it was a little bit what you said, Jay. It felt wrong watching it in subbed. Again, I don't know if it was because the aesthetic or because the dubbed had, hit all the markers, where it's like it paired well with the animation style and it had the right linguistics for the jokes. And oh my gosh, the puns, so many puns and innuendos, they were amazing.
I definitely agree because again, it's like one of those weird lines to draw with anime, and it feels like, well, like what you said, it's like a
Hmm.
westernized anime. And I
Yeah.
would put the same thing again, like it's like one of the key markers of the series is like they put explicitives in, or profanities in almost every line of dialogue.
Yeah.
So like the humor is both like vulgar and crude, and I would say that's the one thing that people would probably get easily turned off to in these first three episodes. Actually, like they're not at all shy about using that kind of language. I mean, in the first scene, basically you see that Panty is basically the incarnation of lust. And that's
Hmm.
really interesting to think of these angels as like embodiments of certain sins, because you have, like you said, Panty is like the embodiment of lust. Like in her first scene, she's get introduced, and not, anything explicit and pornographic, but you see that she has a lusting for men of, all varieties, and like
Yeah.
takes scenes away, and it's just like, oh yeah, they're in bed together, or they're keeping track of how many times they've orgasmed, or like it's just like so much crude humor that goes on. It's like in the same
Hmm.
vein as South Park or Family Guy or American Dad, anything that Seth
Hmm.
MacFarlane basically writes on. Again, like if this was on Adult Swim, I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah. It
That
would definitely fit. I think that's what this character was. Is like, okay, how can we take Adult Swim, put cute girls in it, and make it slightly anime? And I think that's what this was.
For sure, yeah. And like Stocking is the embodiment of sloth, and I'm not sure where Garterbelt kind of fits in, because it feels like the he's kind of making they're kind of making a priest commentary about how
Hmm.
Catholic priests are seen in the West as, a little bit on the pedophilic side of, their, common interpretation. I don't know how to
Hmm.
put that, but yeah, there's some kind of creepy scenes with the black priest, and even
Yeah,
in his
with him in
character
brief.
design, it's, yeah, exactly, with Brief. And of course, like it leans into the way that Japanese animes have depicted black people improperly and offensively, as having like big round circular mouths, or lips, sorry, big lips that take up a
Hmm.
good portion of the face. And we've seen like good, actually, black realistic character designs. Like one of my favorite black characters in anime is, oh, I think you know her, Canary in Hunter x Hunter. Is it Canary? Am I thinking
I'm
of the
trying to
right
remember.
character, Sam?
What did she do in Hunter x Hunter? What was her powers?
She was one of the like housekeepers of the Killua household.
Oh, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. The little girl with the staff. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah. She's one of my favorite black designs or black character designs in anime. But yeah, and the other thing that
Hmm.
I wanted to mention about like how much thought went into this, even though it's like raunchy adolescent humor, is like they pay a lot of homage to like different movies of the West. Did you
Oh yeah.
notice what all the episode titles were called, Sam?
I realized the second episode, and just to touch on the episode structure a little bit. So that's another thing why it feels a bit more Western is because a full episode it's split up into two mini episodes. So something like SpongeBob, where it's like the first 15 minutes is one self-isolated story, and the last 15 minutes is another one. I didn't recognize what the first episode was in reference to, but the second in episode one, part two, the death race, it was a reference to death race, and everybody was the demon that they had to exercise was somebody that could control cars and things like that, and they essentially had to fight each other, like how Mel Gibbs. No, I'm sorry, not Mel Gibson. Was it Mel Gibson that was in the first death race? I know Jason Statham was in the second death race, but essentially they were in cars where they had to kill each other before they make it to the finish line so that they can end up winning back their freedom. So no, I definitely liked those homage, that homage. But which references were you referring to?
Yeah, so I think it's Steven Seagal, not Steven Seagal. It's Rocky.
Oh, Sylvester Stallone.
Sylvester Stallone, thank you,
Yeah.
in the first Death Race. Yeah, but yeah, the Jason Statham one was like a remake of it. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's the original one is called Death Race 2000. And again, I'm a little bit, I don't know if I would say I'm a cinephile, someone that loves movies, but yeah, I was so tuned into what they were doing because they make a Dirty Harry reference. In the first episode, they make the same like Death Race. So like the second part of episode one is just called Death Race 2010, and the second part of episode two is called Sex and the Deton City, like a parody of Sex in the City. And then episode three is called Cat Fight Club, uh, Fight Club. And then the second part of the episode is Pulp Addiction, like Pulp Fiction. So all the titles have kind of like that kind of play on words of like something in the West that people would kind of identify with. So I like all the like homages that they pay attention to because again, like if the comedy's really not your thing, if like you can't really get past, I mean that's kind of all the anime has is like the crude
Hmm.
humor, but they do have a lot of, at least kind of like they're trying to placate to a Western audience. So it's weird
Yeah.
that Panty Stockings doesn't really have a like beloved fan base here because this is so what Americans at the time would kind of vibe with. And I wouldn't be
Oh yeah,
surprised if
definitely.
it started streaming now. Like if they push the streaming of this, more heavily on Funimation, then I think a lot of people would tune in to watch this nowadays.
Oh no, definitely. I think it seems like nowadays they want to feel, they being the Western audience, they want to feel smarter. Like for instance, with works like Rick and Morty, there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of thought that's behind it, but it's delivered with a lot of crude humor, a little bit like Family Guy. Family Guy is not as nuanced, but they do have more thinking behind it. Whereas Panty and Stockings, it's very, very clever in what it does, but it's kind of just there at that level. It doesn't seem to go deeper, but just to touch a little bit on like the expect and the sus. I'm a little sus on Penny of Stockings because it seems like if I kept watching it, they'll try to make it more serious than what it is near the end of the show. Because with certain other animes, like for instance, uh, Overly Cautious Hero, where it starts out very comedic and then near the end you get a turn and it's a more serious understanding and look on the character and the world and their relation to everybody else, and you get to understand why the hero is overly cautious. and you begin to feel for that character. Whereas in that anime, it's a little bit more built up and it's a bit more palatable and understandable. With something like Panty and Stocking, that is, as bombastic and energetic and just in your face, crude, it would not work. But for some reason, in the back of my mind, I feel as though there's a turn like that that's going to happen somewhere, because later on in the show, they have demons that appear that essentially are a parallel or an alternate versions of Panty and Stockings. Whereas Panty and Stocking, they're rude and crude for the sake of doing it. They are prim and proper, and they seek order through chaos. So it's sort of like a commentary on Panty Stocking's character. And I've seen a little bit of it. It doesn't seem to go in deep that I had feared, but that was just halfway through the season of the show. And again, I just have like that thought in the back of my head, that if I finish it, that's going to happen, and I'm going to hate the show.
All right. Yeah, so again, I think I have to put my vote in the opposite to you, that I'm really expecting the rest of the series, because I do see your point that it might try to insert meaning to what it's trying to like portray or even talk about, but it feels like the same way as Family Guy does have some kind of social commentary they're trying to make a point about, with same with South Park. But I think Penny of Stockings is going to do what some of these, this is only 13 episode series. So like, again, like it's dividing the episode, like you said, like old American cartoons into like two halves. So like you're basically getting like 26 episodes essentially. So wouldn't be surprised if in like the last 3 episodes, they're going to say, oh, there was actually some overarching plot or overarching significance, because they are collecting coins. So like, again, they're
Hmm.
trying to get them back to heaven, but they're angels that like to indulge in their own personal pleasures. And that's even somewhat of a commentary. And again, like they're talking about shallow commentary about, your personal indulgements versus, grand ambitions. Because like Garterbelt is the one really forcing them to do their job, because Danton City is basically a city living on the border of heaven and hell. That's kind of why they have a evil spirit problem. And the people are there, like, they have their own comedic personalities. Like the citizens of the city do get like show a spotlight sometimes, because like even in the second half of the first episode, there's a news shopper, narrator, news presser. Yeah, he does have a funny. There is like some things that made me chuckle. So like, Penny and Stockings is a fun time, but it's not funny, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. Kind of like, it's entertaining, but it's nothing that I would put in the bag for. But I do want to watch the rest of it. So I would say that it's expect for me, because small things like, again, the movie references, the paying homage to things does
Hmm.
catch my attention, and I'm looking forward to how else they bring up things, because I'm not surprised if they do something with like other movies of the time, like Kill Bill. Actually, I don't know when Kill Bill came out, but Matrix. Like when they do things, I'm like looking forward to how they're going to incorporate it into the show. So I'm going to put this in the expect category. And the other thing I wanted to mention before we wrap up, Sam, is that there's this iconic scene of their transformation, like talking about magical girls transformations, like the Panty and Stockings transformation scene where they're on a stripper pole is kind of iconic. And it's one of those things that I didn't know where it was from, but I've seen the parody and copies of it. I mean, I've even seen a version of Sasuke and Itachi. That was actually my first. That was my first, yeah, to that iconic, yeah, transformation scene. And like, that kind of was my image of like magical girl shows, because I have like, this is, I guess, my only magical girl show that I've seen other than Madoka Magica, and that's way different than this. But yeah, but yeah, those are my overall feels, that this is probably one of the most enjoyable experiences I've had with an anime, because it was so shocking. It did not. I was not prepared for this, Sam. So I'm glad you introduced this to me.
You're not prepared in a good way. Just to riff on the transformation scene, just a little bit longer. That was one thing that I liked about this show as well. Was there were times when their animations would change, or at least like their art styles. For instance, most of the show is just heavily influenced by American cartoons. As we said, it looks like Teen Titans, Puffy Amiyumi, Powerpuff Girls, but then they would interject the classic anime tropes like the transformation scene, where it was very anime stylized the way that it was done, and it was like them transforming was juxtaposed against the citizens of the city, which was still in American style, which was pretty funny. And whenever they defeated their demons, they would go to a 3D puppet effect, where something a little bit like Puppet Pals. I don't know what you would call it, but they would essentially get a physical representation of the monster or the demon that they had defeated, and they would record that spirit getting blown up or exploded or cut up, however it was that they were destroyed. And it just played into the humor that is Panty and Stockings, and I just really liked that. That was very, very well done.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this show called Chowder, but it was very late. Yeah, it was very late in the lineup for cartoons on Cartoon Network. But yeah, there was this one episode that definitely reminded me of that transition for Panty and Stocking. It was like during the animation of the show, because it was in like it's a cartoon animation. It's like they were like, oh, we run out of money for the voice acting, and then it just shows the actors in their recording booths. Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of like that, and it's so weird. Like when they defeat these monsters, it goes to the shot of like basically a green screen and a table, and the monster just blows up, and it looks like they're shooting it in like a little basement. It looks a crudely decorated basement, and then it goes right back into the animation. So like things like that makes it like kind of worthwhile, and even like small things with like the ED is pretty much of a banger, and like the soundtrack throughout the episodes is pretty good too. It has this like electronic pop kind of vibe to it, which kind of works with the goofy antics that the characters get into. So overall, again, like I'm putting it in the expect category, and you put in the sus. So that is going to close up the discussion of Penny and Stocking with Garterbelt. So you want to say anything, Sam, before we wrap up?
You choosing to disagree with me today, Jay, it's not a good move. You need to repent, you mother.